off. Thank you all for taking time to join today's webinar, Retail Media Mythbusters. I'm Rosalie, I'm the editor of Power Retail, and I will be your moderator for today. It's lovely to have you all here. So in this webinar, we are joined by QSIC and their lovely guests, where we'll explore how AI-driven attribution and optimization are transforming campaign performance, particularly through in-store audio. We have a great lineup of panelists in store for you today. Before I introduce them, I have a quick bit of housekeeping. So we do encourage questions throughout the webinar. You can just pop those in the questions tab on the right-hand side of the pop-up on your screen, and we'll do our best to answer those in a Q&A portion at the end of the session. So introductions. Today we're joined by Artem Lavrinovich. He's the Chief Data and AI Officer at QSIC. We've got Mia Horner, the GM Customer and Loyalty at Coles Liquor, and Ben Dixon, the Head of Retail Media at QSIC. Thanks for coming on, guys. In this session, we'll explore how AI and data intelligence are reshaping the way retailers plan, measure, and optimize campaigns from pre-campaign design to real-time execution. We'll explore the importance of aligning on metrics that matter, understanding the context behind performance, and setting up campaigns for success before they even begin. All very important points, so let's kick right off. Artem, I'm going to start with you. Can you unpack what AI-driven attribution really means in a retail media context?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that, and thanks for having me on this panel. Happy to be here. It's a big topic, so I'll start with an example and just going to paint the landscape as I see it. So for this example, let's just think about a customer. Let's call her Emma. And Emma is thinking about planning a holiday party, and she wants it to be quite fancy. So she's got some ideas of what she might do. She's maybe thinking about serving champagne and some other things. And as part of that, she's doing some research on Google, ChatGPT. It gives her some ideas. Champagne comes up as one of those things. She even gets some suggested brands and so forth. And then, later in the week, she sees an ad on Instagram that shows a particular type of champagne. And as it gets closer to the weekend, she checks in on her Liquorland app to just look at the opening hours on Saturday. She thinks about swinging by the store and picking up some merchandise for her party. And as she's on the app, she's also seeing a few ads. One of them is for champagne. Then finally on Saturday, she swings by the store. She has a few things to pick up on her list, but while in the store, she hears an audio ad about a deal on one of the champagne she's interested in. And then she walks over to the part of the store where you would find champagne, and she sees a beautiful display and a great promotion. And she gets 2 or 3 bottles of champagne, and she walks out of the store. So the question, a very big, interesting question is, so what happened? Like, how much of the behavior that we can observe by this fictitious, in this case, customer Emma, is driven by marketing versus how much of it is organic, right? And you can sort of imagine 2 ends of the spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you can debate like, hey, Emma already had an idea for champagne. She wanted a fancy party, all of these ideas along the way, she was going to buy it anyway, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, you can sort of take a methodology where, every single marketing impression is tracing the sale, and all of a sudden your attributed sales amount to 3 or 4 times what the actual spend of the customer was, right? And neither one of those scenarios is true or accurate, most likely. So really, the role of AI attribution is trying to pick apart how much did advertising in this case really influence choice. And of course, it's really hard to do it for a single person. So you usually deal with groups of customers, thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions. And then what you're trying to pick apart is, in addition to understanding something about the overall incrementality of a campaign, you'd want to understand of maybe relative importance of different factors for a customer like Emma. The way this is done, we can have a whole methodology discussion on this, but really, probably the simplest analogy to think about these AI techniques is like a multiverse, where you're able to simulate multiple versions of sort of what can happen. And if most people will be familiar with an A/B test or a holdout experiment. That's a version of trying to come up with a multiverse scenario where you're holding out a group of customers to understand what would the behavior, you're trying to approximate what behavior would have been like without advertisement. As you're dealing across many channels, that math becomes a lot more complex. Some things you're able to do, sometimes you're able to do holdouts, sometimes you're not. And the whole idea of AI attribution becomes this idea of how do you construct these multiverses that are reliable and useful. And this is something that marketers have been going after a long time. The advances in AI continue to push the boundaries of what's possible. And it's a very exciting field. And it's also fraught with lots of different sort of complications and challenges that we might talk about. But I guess if I were to just kind of summarize, I'd say, to think about the AI measurement as kind of a version of multiverses that are reliable and useful and can be verified is sort of where a lot of marketers and retail media networks aspire to be.
I love that you said the simplest way to explain it is as a multiverse, which is one of the most complex concepts. But I think you explained that really well. What are the key pre-campaign factors that determine whether a campaign will actually succeed?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that, and then maybe it would be great to hear your thoughts as well. It obviously is going to depend on which sector, which type of brand, what type of customer audience we're talking about. I would say in my experience, the big factors, the 80-20, would be first is alignment between audience, message, and the moment. And you can get those things wrong pretty easily. Usually people understand sort of the audience and the message mapping, but getting that in the right moment where it's actually going to matter, because we're quite good at ignoring things and filtering things out that could be relevant to us at some point in time, but they're not relevant in the moment. So really looking for the alignment across all three, the audience, the message, and the moment. It's kind of the concept of relevancy. Thinking through all the components of that for a marketing campaign is a pretty important factor for success, obviously. The next one I would say that I don't see enough of, and I think there's a huge opportunity there, is aligning the investment proportional to the opportunity that the marketing can bring as a part of the campaign. And I almost think of that as treating individual campaigns as a business case. And often measurement comes in on the back end, and you try to understand like what happened by actually using an understanding of what types of base rates, what types of engagements are possible with the audiences up front, and trying to build the business case to where you're basically sizing up the investment that you're putting in different channels. Just makes sense, right? You're not relying on a 300% uplift in order, maybe unless it's a net new product and it's a very low baseline, to make up for that investment. Like I think a lot of that math up front can really right size the investment opportunity. I think the third kind of big factor for me would be making sure that the creative is fitting the channel, right? We'll see cases where a creative that would be amazing on Instagram might actually fail in store. So the more opportunities we have to connect with customers, the more mindful we need to be of how to design the creative to match that moment and match the channel.
Yeah, and actually just to build on around creative and messaging, I think it's hugely topical in our business and a massive focus area. And, saying that, what are the key pre-campaign factors of success, creative's not necessarily a new thing, but the application of it with the tooling that exists is. And so we know that even in just audio alone, particularly for in-store, throughout all our research, we're seeing that, in fact, the right creative can impact and influence a campaign by up to 50%. So getting it right at the pre-planning stages really does matter. And I think, days gone by, creative has always been traditionally an afterthought for many campaigns. And it's not surprising, because traditionally the attributes of what actually makes a great creative execution has been subjective and not validated by reliable data. And so, and then you match that with the other challenge of, the production side, which at times, depending on the channel, can be expensive or cumbersome. And even for audio, which is traditionally actually, quite a cost-effective channel, I think today now, if you're looking at actually creating multiple variants and stuff, it becomes very costly. And so now, through leveraging AI, the guesswork around what makes a great ad, what is actually going to deliver the result that you need, and all those production barriers are completely removed. So the rise of generative AI for ad production, for example, has changed the game forever. And, with our proprietary tooling, and we do a lot of work with Mia and the team leveraging Lucy, which is our generative AI ad production platform, we can now create ad variants in minutes. And so we can do different scripts, voices, tones, music, messaging, hierarchies at a click of a button, and deploy that as well in store within seconds and moments. And so what that gives us is that opportunity to start to A/B test creative and not guess, and then leverage real data to understand which version is actually driving the uplift. And so when we run those genuine A/B experiments in real time, it allows us to then optimize while the campaign's live. And then suddenly you start looking at creative as this, it's not subjective, it's this controllable and genuinely measurable input, instead of like a fixed constraint or afterthought. But you do need the tooling to get the message right. You need to ensure, that you need the ability to leverage generative AI in order to do that, and then have, I suppose, the right platforms to actually deploy that accordingly to get the impact that you're looking for.
I'd probably add in there as well, Ben, the work that we do in advance to really set a campaign up for success. So we will do a lot of, I like to call it sort of like playbook planning, to go, what do we do in this scenario if we don't get the result we want? So that we're not waiting until something happens to tell us what we should do. We already have, based on what we've seen happen through, our programs in the past, what are some of the complexities or curveballs that we don't see, so that we are actually ready to change or make a course correction as we need to. So that's really important as you're planning, is not just to align on the metrics for success and the metrics that matter, but also to make sure that you have that game plan, that when things don't go as we expected, or as we see another challenge come in, that we're ready to go. And then you've always got that playbook that can be updated. And that's the beauty as well of the whole AI piece, is that it's able to then say, we now need to flip to plan B, plan C. So that really helps that preparation.
Absolutely. I mean, flipping that, you mentioned aligning on metrics. I mean, how do you make sure that you're on the same page with brand partners and balancing that sales uplift with long-term loyalty and trust?
So Ben, I'll chat about this one just in terms of what that sort of looks like for us. And I think, it's really interesting because what we actually have is, is as retail sort of media matures, and we know that success isn't always what we thought it was. And for a long time, we've always measured campaigns by those short-term, metrics, that sales uplift, that ROAS, that conversion, because that's what we could report, and they are only part of the story, and they tell us what happened, but not why and whether it's sustainable. So we work really closely with Ben and his team to make sure that, success is really broader than that. And yes, it's commercial, but it's also about that customer connection. It's also about that brand health, and the real win is when these three things move together. And our suppliers trust us to deliver a great result in our retail outlets for their brands. So, we don't want to just ensure that we're delivering a quick sales spike, right? Because that's great, but it doesn't necessarily build brand trust, and that's not necessarily going to give us long-term success. So I think it's actually about balancing the three lenses: commercial performance, customer behavior, and then that brand sort of outcomes if we're thinking about it for our suppliers that invest in our channels. And so, as I said, we do spend time with the team at QSIC to go, okay, before we're starting, what is the objective? Of course, sales is the action that we want to see, but what's the current brand awareness of this SKU, this brand, and therefore what's the job that we have to do? What's the velocity? How fast does it normally move? And what's happening seasonally across each of the categories? And, you know, that helps us shape the inputs for what, I suppose, good looks like. And so, to give an example, and Artem talked about, you know, somebody, you know, buying something, you know, if you think about a premium gin in a quiet month, it's going to have a very different expected ROAS than if you have a mainstream beer on promotion in the middle of the summer. So if you do not account for that up front, you're really setting the wrong benchmarks or expectations. And I would say, you know, probably even worse, you're like working towards, you know, you and your partners, and I'm talking about our suppliers, aren't working to the same definition of success. So when our suppliers come to us and they want to invest, it's very clear on what's happening with your brand, what do you want to achieve? And then we'll work with Ben and his team to go, right, you know, beyond the quick wins, what is the sort of, the sort of, you know, the customer loyalty plan? What is the basket composition that we want to see with it? Do these SKUs or brands have adjacencies, you know, to drive cross-shop or repeat purchase? And then with the incremental, hopefully, uplift, do we really change behavior? And so the insight that really sort of matters is that, you know, we have to have that brand sentiment. And I suppose those consideration metrics so that we can make sure the campaigns really perform. As Artem said, you know, things that work on Instagram or through, you know, the digital channels don't necessarily work and translate well in an audio environment. So that AI component really connects, you know, the brand with what you actually hear in store, what they buy at the till, and what they see, you know, when they're pre-store as well, almost to Ben's point, in real time. So for us, I think the real strength is, you know, that AI piece coupled with the sort of human alignment on the metrics that we want up front, so that we can actually get Lucy or, you know, the background piece to really optimize, not just for efficiency, but for actual real growth metrics that we want to see across brand and across customer as well, consumer.
Definitely. Ben, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was gonna, one of the areas which me has really pushed us actually as well, which has been great, is to just building on that topic around broadening what success looks like. And part of that has been actually what we've found as a benefit, which sounds obvious to say, is how we can make sure we communicate what we have aligned on in terms of what success looks like to the brand partner or client investing in the channel. Often, sometimes it might stay with a vendor, and, you know, whether it's working with me or in the team, and it doesn't necessarily translate to the marketers or their trade teams in terms of what we're running at. And I think that, you know, for us, everyone knows they want to see sales uplift, as Mia said, that's really important. But if we're starting to look at things of, actually, this campaign was identifying, we wanted to see what type of creative actually performs, what stores are actually, and what clusters of the stores are outperforming each other for this said SKU. You know, what are the right day parts for our audience that we want to look at, or what are the day parts or segments that we want to grow? And so it's around building that data foundation for the next campaigns. And so, you know, and we're just trying to manage the expectations before the campaigns have happened. And we've actually ran campaigns before, and they've actually had a said neutral result or a minor sales uplift. But the response from the invested partners has been overwhelmingly positive, because we can give them broader insights beyond that then feeds into the next campaign. And it's sometimes hard. Sometimes people are like, okay, I'll invest in that, I'll trial that. And sales uplift becomes that determining factor if they reinvest. And that's where it's really important then to talk about, well, look, yes, it's a core metric, but there's 5 other things that we should also be looking at in terms of success, which then obviously, you know, creates momentum. And I think we've all got a vested interest, whether you're a brand, a retailer, or a vendor partner, to broaden success, because suddenly it's a flip of a coin. If you're relying on one metric, did it work? Did it not? So it's a healthy conversation, it's a moving one, and it's something which we're starting to get some good benchmarks for across category as well.
Yeah, well, Mia touched on the importance of that real-time data throughout that and building that relationship. Artem, could you delve into how you're actually using that real-time data to really optimize campaigns?
Yeah, and so I'll speak to how we do that at QSIC, obviously. And it actually starts to be good at real time. I love what Mia, you mentioned about, I think of that sort of hypothesis, lining out like your hypothesis of what you would do up front, right? So we start by thinking about what can we learn from data before the campaign even goes live in the first place. So to give an example, maybe non-alcoholic IPAs. I was thinking, I've been trying them out. Athletic Brew is a good one of my favorites, I guess. And so how would we work with a brand like that, right? To think about real-time campaign optimization. Well, before we even launch the campaign, one of the things we would look for data is to help us identify automatically the opportunities on when we can align that right audience in the right moment, right? And when can we amplify? When does it make sense to amplify that brand? And one of the things that we might see in the data in Australia that might be your eastern suburbs around January timeframe, and really heavy users of Strava fitness app, there's like 400 or 500% increase, just natural increase in interest in the non-alcoholic IPAs, right? So that's a great moment to understand as we're leading up to that. How can we build on something that people already want to do? How can we amplify that signal? But also the data might show that actually, yeah, there's a huge spike there, but every Sunday afternoon, there's also a pretty decent spike that's happening, right? So again, you can't necessarily do that brand by brand without the help of AI and algorithms. You really need a system that can scale. So that actually we start before the campaign even goes live. With that, if we go then deeper into like how do we develop the hypotheses, we take that all the way into the creative generation, right? So an example of when we're talking about New Year, New You type of theme in January, the underlying message might be something around, athletes were also humans, as we're trying to relate of how people are leaning into, what's naturally hard in driving transformation. And for a Sunday afternoon, you might sort of accent on, well, it is a real craft beer, but it doesn't make, your head hurt on Mondays. That would be a much more timely message. And it's still talking about the same brand, right? But it's all coming from what is the data intuiting around how customers are thinking about and why, what need, what problem is that brand solving for them. So with this, we already set up basically every campaign that's going out of the gate is already honing in with hypotheses of what's going to work and where. And then the value of real-time signals is not waiting until the campaign is finishing, but listening to point of sales data on a daily basis. And actually, in some cases, it's possible to get it even more frequent than that to understand to what extent the hypotheses that the data was intuiting before the campaign launched are working out to be true. And then as part of that process, we would use reinforcement learning, for example, to look for blind spots, right? So you might have the best hypothesis in the world and you might still miss some trend that might be happening. So the way we allow the system to explore opportunities that it might have otherwise missed and then pick up on those in real time. So in that process, when you're running a campaign, you can, let's say it's a month-long campaign, it can be optimized at minimum 30 times on a daily basis through that. So that's at a high level how we connect the dots on the technology side.
I would also just add on to that obviously with the connection in our point of sale systems to QSIC, being able to really see the AI in action where it's sort of, adaptive, agile, and anchored in customer behavior is really, really, really powerful, right? If I think about the fact that and again, it goes back to the objective that you're trying to, drive, because sometimes it's not just about sales, it's that awareness. So for example, if you've got a brand with a great Sonic, and you want to just get people used to that because you're going to gear up for a campaign in 3 or 4 months, then we know that customers will be more susceptible, you know, when they're buying this type of category, to be open to hearing XYZ from this brand. So it's not necessarily giving us a conversion mechanic, it's actually just driving that awareness, right? And so we have the ability for the data to tell us then, are people picking it up, or are people, you know, if we're actually wanting to drive trial or loyalty, what's our hurdle rate for driving trial? What's our hurdle rate for driving loyalty? What's our hurdle rate for basically anything that is an established brand that's just on a price promo? And Lucy, or AI, can do that for us right in the middle. So we're not waiting to that post-campaign report, right? It's making those adjustments. And the beauty of it is that it can be tailored across the whole country, so that while we're up in Queensland and it's really the dry season and it's beautiful, we can be talking about, you know, maximizing all of the fabulous refreshment styles. And it's the wonderful Melbourne weather here, where you get a hailstone, which is supposed to be in spring. We can actually then dial up the campaigns that are going to drive that sort of connection to the heavier style brands, you know, that might be more stout driven, or red wines, for example, and it will make those adjustments in real time. So we don't have to go, oh, sugar, which, you know, things are not doing what we need it to do. It's actually pushing out the communication as we need it to make those connections, new connections with the customer, right down to individual store level. It can be done, which is just amazing. So you've got that hyper local approach that we're able to be very relevant seasonally, for the community, and for, you know, where you actually might have categories that are really important in a certain area, like for example in the CBD with regards to, you know, let's say Lunar New Year. And so that's really important that we're able to harness the power, because if I had to have a team managing that, I would not be able ever to have a team that does that level of micro execution. So the efficiency, the AI part of this, is actually like having dedicated team members that are just responding to what's happening in the environment to deliver the result that we need.
Fantastic. I mean, Ben, this must change the game from that sales perspective. How does the technology change how media is sold and evaluated from your perspective?
Yeah, this is where the shift really happens. And because AI has essentially moved, for example, you know, particularly in a physical store environment, as Mia was building on then, you know, AI moves the in-store audio from being a static placement buy to, you know, a true performance measurable channel. And historically, you know, speaking specifically audio, you would buy a fixed block of audio and you hoped it delivered something. You know, there was no way to optimize mid-campaign. You know, success was measured after the fact, if at all. And from an in-store retail media perspective, you know, as Mia was building on earlier, you know, every store is traditionally been treated equally, you know, despite them being very locations, transaction behaviors and volumes and environment. And so with AI, you know, the whole conversation has changed. And instead of asking now, you know, when we're talking about planning campaigns, like where we place an ad, you know, we're asking now, you know, what behaviors do we want to influence and how quickly can we make that happen? Because AI does all that work for us. And so, you know, we're starting to plan with that more predictive signaling, those metrics that Artem was speaking of earlier. And, you know, we're optimizing while the campaign is running. And, you know, we're evaluating performance, you know, just the same way that or digital channels have done for many years, but this time in a physical store environment. And to kind of put that into what's the metricated benefit of this, you know, we're seeing real impact. And so we know when you compare a static audio campaign versus an optimized campaign, you're driving 2.5 to 3 times greater incremental sales uplift on average. And so what that means is it's rather than delivering an audio ad at the same time to every single store, regardless of context, versus one that's optimized, that is serving the right ad at the right time, you see this incremental impact. And so we're starting to now move from, rather than just blind, 2 weeks of audio, we start talking about, what's the behaviors that we want to shift? What's the benchmark uplift? Do we want to drive, what customer and audiences we want to reach? And so, all that means that for retailers, it becomes a more valuable asset. It's a more accountable asset. And for the brands, it gives a real clear sight from message to real measurable impact.
Rosie, I'd love to add there as well. I mean, we talk about, sales and obviously retail media and the whole piece, around in-store audio. It isn't just about driving sales to me, and as a retailer, it's about driving that value. And it's value, of course, for the customer, right? It's value for the retailer, it's value for the brand. And when we align on that in the start, that AI and that data, they don't make just campaigns, right? They don't make them smarter, they make them more meaningful to connect. So an example, we partner, Liquorland is the official gold partner of Cricket Australia, and our new campaign has just launched. And, with cricket kicking off this week, the Ashes, which is, for those of you that are all in Australia and UK, this is absolutely huge. But we'll be able to push down into store live scores of what's happening and talk about the beers that are related to the campaign, and actually even course sort of correct our message to be able to say, if Boland, hits a 6, you can get your mountain culture for X dollars off. You know what I mean? You cannot do that if you have a static campaign where it's locked and loaded weeks out and we cannot make any adjustments. So Ben can be sitting back watching the cricket and know that basically, we want to basically push out these messagings as if when this happens. And that's really exciting. It's adding value to people's shopping experience in store, and not just pushing out a line and price mechanic or, a brand message. It's actually creating an environment where it's giving you information and making your shopping with us connected and more meaningful, because we're still keeping you informed that you're not missing out what's going on outside when you're inside buying what you need from us. And that's really exciting. I'm looking forward to all of those ways that we can be more meaningful beyond sales and driving value.
That's a great point. I mean, makes you think of a recent burger chain campaign that had to change last minute. Look, we are coming to the end of my questions. I encourage the audience to pop some questions in. We will get to those shortly. But the one I want to leave you guys with is, as AI and data continue to evolve, what's the biggest opportunity you see for retailers and brands to work smarter together in the next few years? And I'd love to hear from all three of you here.
I could start, perhaps.
Do you want to go first?
Okay, sounds good. So this is obviously a space where there's a lot of, I don't think you can open in a LinkedIn feed or, open up some relevant publication when there's not a conversation about how AI is changing things. So I think there's some really obvious things of where we can all imagine from, the sort of the gap between an idea to execution and then figuring out whether that was a good idea and adopting. Generally, that's sort of going to close, right? That's the direction of travel. In terms of practically, I think and everybody's slightly at a different level and a lot different level. If you look at the retailers globally and brands globally, et cetera, and the ability to kind of harness the power of AI. So I'll give a partially boring, but it just still remains true answer. There's still a fairly significant gap on the data organization. So if you think a lot about what data these AI systems consume, a lot of times it's super fragmented, still in silo, right? You can have your point of sales data separate to where your loyalty data originates, separate to where your browsing behavior. Then there's a whole question of clean rooms and connecting that to offsite behavior. Campaign metadata, I think it's going to continue to be more and more important for the AI to understand exactly what was on the creative, which products it was featuring, and then automatically kind of embedding that in from the very early part of the life cycle. So I see there's quite a bit of work ahead to sort of bring the the promise of AI to life that's going to be around the data foundations. And I do think it's going to open some new opportunities of sharing data in a secure and a safe and privacy first way between retailers and brands and different partners. And to the extent that we can unlock that, the layer what AI can do with that, the sophistication and the delight from that is just going to grow exponentially.
Yeah, I was thinking about this a lot, and we're talking about this a lot of late around, and it's a difference probably answering it today versus over the next few years. You mentioned Rosalie. So over the next few years, it's super exciting. And the biggest opportunity that I see in the context of retail media is around faster alignment inside the joint business plans between, retailers, brands, and vendors. And that traditionally everyone's intent is aligned to obviously drive greater outcomes, but it is a cumbersome process, and it's not the fault of the retailer or the brand or anyone. It's just information gathering, hypothetical brainstorming, budget extraction, business cases, and there's a lot of back and forth. I think, Artem touched on around, the AI tooling will start to become where they thread the needle between collecting data, extracting insight into strategic plans, channel mix, and execution will be able to be modeled and done through scenario planning. You'll be able to start to look at what are these, if I play with these inputs, what will be the outcome? And the inputs might be things like, channel mix, frequency, creative, SKUs, particular stores, hey, we're looking at sports sponsorships, so I want to kind of leverage, is a correlation between targeting audiences on the way to sporting games and venues, and target the liquor land surrounding that on the way. And so, what that starts to do is, you can begin to model out scenarios in seconds and not weeks, which, even means no more pilots to a degree, which, often to do the cool stuff that works or you want to do, it's just cumbersome, and you've got to get investment time and resource, and you can't. And so, like we were in Shop Talk this year in March, which is, 6 months ago, and we were working and talking to some of the major retailers and CPG brands over there, and everyone's on, a journey as well. And we were talking about exactly this and demonstrating kind of like this type of tooling. And you could just see that overwhelmingly it was one of excitement. And we were all speaking about, if we're working off the same predictive scenario planning, same uplift modeling, looking at the same demand signals, everything's going to move faster. So budgets are going to get unlocked faster, creative's going to get approved faster, or just generic approvals are going to come faster because it's all backed by data. So I think it's going to be interesting in terms of the output of all of us is going to increase. But to what Mia was saying earlier, though, like we can plan at the start of the year, but then adjust as we go. And I think that's where that toing and froing will, in that joint business planning, will not become a once-off start of the year thing. It'll be this constant, rather than like an episodic type optimization of a couple of times a year or whatever every quarter, it'll be just continuous. So yeah, that's an area to watch out for.
I think the area for me is around that real collaboration with, the brand supplier, the retailer, and then, if I think about our partnership with QSIC, making sure that it's really connected, so that essentially you are always keeping your stakeholder, which is your brand supplier, they're trusting you to do a job to get their brand to the right amount of customers. And so it's helping them understand that things may have to change if we don't get the result that we are seeing, and help them understand that we're scenario planning for that, so that the campaign that we all agreed with up front might not actually end up being the campaign that goes live, because we're listening to the data. We're saying to, you know, the model, tell us what we need to do, because now we've had 6 months or six weeks of continuous downpour or bushfires or whatever, and therefore this has happened in the economy, this has happened in the market, people aren't drinking, or whatever the scenario might be. And helping them understand that you've got to be agile in your thinking about how to create meaningful campaigns, and it's not just essentially a brand price and promo message. Helping them come on the journey of what that success not just looks like, but how it might need to change. And I think the good partners are the ones that can show we're easily ready to adapt if things don't go our way and the campaign doesn't have to stay static. So it's taking your supplier, your partner, the person that's trusting you with their brand along on the journey, because I feel like we get it, and you know, we're all ready to go and we're flying, but you often can forget that it's their brand, and if you don't take them along for the journey, they're wondering why they haven't heard their ad the way that they thought it was going to be in store. And actually that we've optimized, it's not just optimized it, we've created meaningful value because something has changed. That means that we've seen an opportunity to deliver a better result, a more strong outcome.
That's great. We'll move on to the audience questions. I think we just have time for one of them, but I reckon this is a great one to end on, and that is, if there's one thing retailers and brands should start doing differently tomorrow to set campaigns up for success, what would it be?
Can I just start off with that one, because I'm very passionate about that one. My thing is that I feel like, again, and I know that I sound, you know, like, you know, I've said this already, that we've got to move away from thinking about it's just a sales result, right? You've got to move away from thinking that everything is down to, you know, what is that ROAS? What is that sort of sales uplift? What is that conversion rate? We've actually got to be able to say, you know, what is your objective? Or if you could drive value, is it value through loyalty, through trial, through connection? You know, really help retailers and brands start to think about, what does success look like beyond sales? Because sales will give you that spike right now. To drive long-term value in your brand, you need to create that whole value proposition. And to me, it's helping them understand that if, you know, you're investing in, you know, the retail media and the audio channel, that they need to hear it a number of times. They've got to connect with the right meaningful message and against, you know, what we're trying to achieve. So being very clear in the inputs, as opposed to, hey, I just want to put this ad on audio and expect a sales result. That's binary, right? That is gone. You've got to think about what is the value proposition wrapped around your brand. And if we can get suppliers and retailers to be thinking of that and challenging our suppliers to say, yeah, I know you want to see a sales uplift, but what do you want to do in terms of your brand awareness metrics? What about your brand health? What about your customer basket? You know, we can help you understand that they're picking up this product every time they buy this product. So what are the adjacencies? And therefore, how do we make you smarter on who you partner with to be able to derive that maximum value? That would be my wish list if we could do one thing different tomorrow.
Fantastic. I think that summed that up perfectly. Artem, Ben, no, I think that you've answered that perfectly. Artem, Ben, do you have anything to add, or should we wrap up?
Adam?
I think this was great. To me, the theme of kind of, and Mia, I think that you hit on this again, of kind of how do we use the idea of what we're going to measure and why and how upfront, and be ready for multiple scenarios, be ready to adapt. So doing that thinking that often happens after the campaign is finished, like how did we do, but it's too late to act, like bringing that forward in the process is probably the lowest hanging fruit for most folks today still.
Great. Well, look, we are running out of time. I think the app's going to kick us out in a second. I'd love to keep chatting. There are some more audience questions. What we will do is get you in touch with the team to answer those. I want to give our speakers a huge thank you. Some fantastic insights in there. Thank you for making time, and thank you to our audience.
Thank you all for having us.
Thanks,
Appreciate
everyone.
it. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you.
Bye.